Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, I'm creating some winter metallic magic, creating some die cut winter cards using Lisa Horton Crafts metallic inks. This is the Snowflake Kisses collection with Lisa Horton Crafts and Spellbinders. We have the snowflake background die, the layered snowflake die, as well as the snowflake wreath die. There's also the gift boxes and bags die set, as well as the Snowflake Kisses sentiments press plate and die set. Look at all of the sentiments that you can create using 2 different plates and 2 different dies. So I'm going to start off by creating a ton of sentiments. I'm going to do 1 set on Hammermill Cardstock and 1 set on Oceanside Cardstock. So I have the option of whether I want to have a sentiment on white cardstock or on the Oceanside Cardstock when I'm creating my cards. Any of the extra sentiments, and there's going to be a ton of extra sentiments, I'm going to put in a little Ziploc bag. I'm going to save it in this package for this press plate and die set. So next time I go to use this, if there's sentiments that I want to use for the cards that I'm going to be creating then, I might already have some done that are going to work. I used a little bit of embossing powder tool on my cardstock, and then I'm inking my plate up with some VersaMark ink. I put the clear plate to the base and then run it through my die cutting machine. You need the pressure from the die cutting machine to press those sentiments right into the plate. Once we have the sentiments pressed into the plate, I can put this on a scrap piece of paper, pour on my embossing powder, and for these cards I'm going to use some silver superfine embossing powder, and then we can melt that powder. Now, when I'm doing BetterPress, especially sentiments, I really like to use superfine embossing powder when it's available. It's not available in every type of embossing powder, but I think you just get so much more detail. And because these press plate sentiments are fairly detailed, I just think you get a lot better results. And I took a minute to count all of the sentiments on the 2 plates. We are creating 26 sentiments all at once, and it really doesn't take much time or much more time than just creating a few. So it's always nice to be able to create a ton of them at once. This is a piece of A2 Hammermill Cardstock, so it's 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches, and it fits in there perfectly with those 2 plates. I do need to die cut with the dies separately, otherwise they would overlap, but we get a ton of sentiments really quickly. Perfect for holidays, perfect for winter cards. For die cutting, I'm using some Best Ever craft tape in order to tape that die in place and make sure it doesn't move on me. The tape that I'm using is stuff that's been used a couple times, so I don't need to worry about the pressure of the die cutting machine really adhering it to the paper. I don't have to worry about that at all. So I'm just going to put 1 die. I tried to put both dies on, but they overlap, so we can't do both of them. We never want our dies to overlap when we're putting them through our die cutting machine. And just with that 1 pass, we have all of these sentiments ready to go. So I'm going to set those aside so that I have a whole pile of sentiments to go through while I'm creating. I'll be creating 6 cards in this video, and obviously if we're creating 26 sentiments from each 1/4 sheet of paper, and I'm doing it with this light cardstock and the Oceanside cardstock, I'm going to have far more sentiments than I need, so we'll have a ton of leftovers. So after doing that first pass, I'm going to position the die for the second half of these sentiments, put them through the machine, and die cut those. So for the second set of sentiments on the Oceanside cardstock, I did most of that off screen. The process is exactly the same as doing it on the white cardstock here, and I also used some silver superfine embossing powder for that. And you could use whatever color embossing powder you want. Because these are snowflake and winter cards, I just think silver is going to work perfectly with them. I'm also using some glitter cardstock, and that glitter cardstock has some silver flecks in it, so I think this is going to be perfect. I'm starting off with a very simple card, simply because the other cards are going to be a little bit more detailed and a little bit more layered. So I started off using the gift boxes and bags die set. I have my pieces die cut out of some Waterfall Cardstock, Seaside, as well as Oceanside Cardstock, and I'm just going to layer those pieces together. I'm just going to layer these gifts on top of my card base. I'm not even putting a piece of extra cardstock with a mat around it, but you certainly could if you wanted to add a little bit more detail to this. Once I have these pieces glued together, and I'm using some Barely Art glue in a fine line bottle, that way I can glue all the tiny die cuts as well as assemble my cards, I'm going to layer these die cuts in the bottom left corner of this particular card. If you prefer, you could even center it. I just wanted to have them layered to the side. At this point, I hadn't decided if I wanted my sentiment to go towards the side or the right side of it or the top. I ended up choosing the top because I thought it was a little bit more balanced that way with that dark sentiment, as well as having the dark box top on that bottom gift. So super simple card. Again, you can make it a little bit more complicated if you want, but I knew that the next cards were going to be or have more detail to them, so I decided to keep the simplest one to start. For my next card, I'm using that layered snowflake die set. I have one piece die cut out of Oceanside Cardstock that I'm using the Natural Pearl ink from Lisa Horton Crafts to ink blend around. This is a white ink that has a lot of shimmer to it. When you put it on the Oceanside Cardstock, you can see that it's not an opaque white. We're going to get a white haze on there, but we're still going to see that shimmer, and we're still going to see that Oceanside Cardstock underneath there. For my larger snowflake here, that is die cut out of the Seaside Cardstock, and I used some distress inks in Mermaid Lagoon as well as Uncharted Mariner in order to ink blend the center of that, just so we have some color variation and a little bit of interest. I'm going to layer this on top of the shadow die cut from this set, and that was die cut out of Oceanside Cardstock. It's going to give it a nice frame around it. For the large and small detail pieces for these snowflakes, this I have die cut out of that white glitter paper. This is from the Antique White Glitter or Treasured Cardstock pack. That pack has 5 different finishes of specialty cardstocks, and they all have an antique white look to them. This glitter cardstock also has some silver flecks of glitter in there. You see white overall, but if you look closely at it, you'll see little bits of glitter in there. And it just adds some beautiful sparkle as well as really nice texture to this snowflake. I did it for the upper layer of the large snowflake as well as the upper layer for the snowflake center. Once we have those pieces layered together, I can glue that center on top of the larger snowflake. Now, because I'm gluing it on top of that larger snowflake and the upper layer is that glitter cardstock, we're going to need to let that dry for just a little bit longer than regular cardstock. It's just going to take a little bit for that glue to go into that glitter cardstock and then start to dry. To add a little bit of extra sparkle, as if that cardstock wasn't enough, I added an aquamarine gem in the center just to center it and just give it a little bit more sparkle there. I'm going to set that over to the side and we're going to work on our background. So for this background, I'm using that snowflake background die set, and there's 2 dies in that set. There's an outer part and an inner part. I have those dies taped together with some Best Ever craft tape, and I'm taping them to a 1/4 sheet of Hammermill cardstock. And for this background, I'm going to emboss that die cut. So I'm using the stacking on my die cutting machine to emboss a die cut. And we're just going to press the texture from that snowflake background die into that cardstock. It's not going to cut all the way through because we're using the layering for embossing a die cut. This is just a great way to use your background dies in a new way, a little bit of a different way. This has been around for years, so this is not a new technique in any way, shape, or form, but it's a great way to use your dies to impress the texture onto the back. So I trimmed that down to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. I took 1/8 of an inch off of all 4 sides. And then I'm using that Mermaid Lagoon Distress ink just to do a little bit of ink blending around the outside areas. I'm not doing the whole thing. You certainly could if you want, but I don't want to lose the whiteness, the brightness. I just want to frame the outside areas in a little bit. So I'm using a large Spellbinders blending brush there so we can put as much or as little ink as we want around those edges. And it also enhances that texture in the back. For the mat for this card, I have this piece of Oceanside Cardstock that I die cut my snowflake pieces out of. That is 4 inches or 4 1/4 inches by 5 1/2 inches. So it's the whole background to my card. Then we're going to glue our embossed piece on top of that. We're not even going to be able to see that anything was die cut out of it. It's just a great way to extend your cardstock a little bit and make it go a little bit further. I put a large acrylic block on there to hold it down nice and flat while everything is drying. Because we have that embossed texture, it's not all having contact with the underlayer to it. So we want to make sure to keep it nice and flat so that there is a good amount of adhesive that has that contact while it's drying. I glued my snowflake a little bit off to the left side just for something a little bit more interesting. And then I did my sentiment towards the bottom right. I also had my snowflake going a little bit off the card, again, just for something a little bit more interesting, but you could certainly center it if you prefer that look. For my next card, I'm using the snowflake wreath die, and I have the large and the small outer circle die cut out of Oceanside Cardstock as well as Waterfall Cardstock. I'm using the Frozen Icicles metallic ink pad from Lisa Horton Crafts in order to ink blend around it. This is going to add some really nice color as well as that metallic shine. Now the metallic inks that I'm using in this video are part of the color combo of the month on the Lisa Horton Crafts Facebook group. Every month since January they started. They have a color combo of the month, and it's a fun way just to see that same color combo with a bunch of different ideas. So I thought I would incorporate that in this video, and my last card uses just that color combo with some white cardstock. So once I have my pieces ink blended, I can add the different layers on top. This upper layer for my large circle is die cut also out of that antique white glitter cardstock. Again, lots of sparkle in this. I'm using glitter cardstock for this, but you could easily use a pearl cardstock, or you could even just use white cardstock with a pearl ink on it or white cardstock on its own. So there's a lot of different options for this. I added that larger circle. The inner circle with that snowflake there was ink blended with the platinum metallic ink pad from Lisa Horton Crafts. Again, that is part of the color combo of the month, and I wanted to incorporate both of those in this snowflake. That platinum is like a silver, but it's got a little bit of a green tone to it, so it was a really unique color. For the center of this wreath, I chose to use some opal gems in the center. You could also add opal gems in the snowflakes around the outside of the wreath if you wanted to continue having those opals in the center of those snowflakes as well. That would be absolutely beautiful. For the background for this card, I'm using some of the Seaside Cardstock. I have that trimmed down to 4 inches by 5¼ inches. I'm using some Uncharted Mariner Distress Ink to ink blend around the outside edges of that just to frame it in. It ties in the different colors of the snowflake as well by having that ink blending on there. Once I have that ink blended on there, we can add a little bit of splatter, and I'm using that platinum metallic ink pad. I'm adding a little bit of water to it. Then I have a nice brush here that I like to use for splatter. Put it through that ink and then just tap it onto the end of my finger so that it will splatter on that background. It's just going to add a little bit of interest to that background. It's also going to tie that platinum ink that is on one of those layers for that snowflake. We can glue that once it's completely dry to our A2 card base, and then we can add our snowflake wreath to the center of it. This one I did center in the card a little bit higher so that there's some space for the sentiment below it, but I didn't have this one going off the card like I did for the last one. Once we have that sentiment on there, our card is done. I did put my acrylic block on there to hold it down nice and flat while everything is drying. But again, a super simple card, but all of that die cut detail with the glitter cardstock and those metallic inks just take it to the next level. For my next card, I have a piece of 4¼ by 5½ inch Waterfall Cardstock that I'm ink blending around the outside edges with that Uncharted Mariner Distress Ink, just framing it in. For this one and for the next one, I'm going to be using that snowflake background die set. So we're going to overlay on top of this ink blended background, and that ink blending is just going to give it a little bit more visual interest than, say, just plain cardstock underneath there. For my background to my snowflake, because I'm going to put a large snowflake from the layered snowflake die set on top of my snowflake background, I have this die cut out of Oceanside Cardstock, and I'm ink blending around the tips with that platinum ink. I wanted just to add that shimmer as well as that different color, so it just changes the color of the Oceanside Cardstock just a little bit. I'm going to glue on the overlay to this snowflake, and I don't have the shadow die cut out of this one, so this one here we're just using the underlay and then the overlay with all of the detail pieces. That is die cut out of that glitter cardstock. Again, it gives it a lot of beautiful sparkle to it. Once we have that overlaid on top of that, we can set that aside with the acrylic block on there to dry, and then we're going to glue our background ink blended piece on there. My snowflake background here is die cut out of pearl finish cardstock from that antique white treasured cardstock pack. So like I said before, there are 5 different finishes. There's 3 sheets of each finish. And I really like the pearl background because it has a bit of a gold shimmer to it. So it's got a really unique look to it. It's perfect for things like snowflakes, anything that you want to have some shimmer and shine. I didn't want to have glitter cardstock on the background with a snowflake that had glitter on top of it, but I still wanted it to have a little bit more interest than just plain white cardstock. So I thought that pearl finish was perfect for this. Once that, or while that is drying, I'm going to add glue to my large snowflake here. I'm going to center this one on this card. We have a lot of detail on here with that background. One of my corners, or one of my tips to one of my snowflakes, it has a little tip off, and the die must have shifted a little bit while I was die cutting. So I'm going to cover that by putting my sentiment on top of this. So I'm using one of the sentiments that was done on that Oceanside cardstock. I used some foam pop dots in order to raise it to accommodate for the dimension from that snowflake, but we're just going to cover that tip that has that die cut imperfection to it. I'm going to use one of the opal gems for the center of this one as well. And again, even though these cards really are fairly simple, they've got a lot of detail to them because of the die cuts, because of the ink blending with the metallic cardstock, as well as the specialty cardstocks that we're including with this. For the next card, I have some Oceanside cardstock. This is 4¼ inches by 5½ inches, and I'm using that natural pearl ink around the outside edges. Again, it's just going to give it a variation of color, as well as that beautiful shimmer from that pearl pad. And you can see that it starts off a lot darker white, and then as it soaks into that cardstock, it lightens up. So we get an ink blended edge to it that has a really interesting look. You could use this on lighter cardstock, and basically all you would see is the shimmer. The white wouldn't really affect the lighter cardstocks quite as much as it does on the darker cardstock, but this pearl cardstock has such a gorgeous shimmer to it that's absolutely stunning. For this one here, again, this is 4¼ inches by 5½ inches. We're going to add this to our card base. I do have the snowflake background for this one done with that glitter cardstock, and we're going to lay it onto our background. For this one, I'm not adding any die cuts over top of it, so we're just going to have a very simple background with the glitter, or the antique white glitter cardstock snowflake background on top of that Oceanside background. So we're going to have some great texture because of that. To add just a little bit more sparkle to it, I'm going to put gems in the centers of each one of those snowflakes, and that is just going to add that little bit of sparkle and just a little bit more color because I'm using the aquamarine gems for this one. These gems already have adhesive on the back of them, and I use the die pick tool from the handy tool set. I pierce it into the adhesive behind the gem and use that to lift it where I want it, and then I just used my finger from my left hand to press that adhesive in place. So these gems have 4 different sizes to them. For this particular card, I'm using the second to smallest size. For some of the other ones on the inside or centers of those snowflakes, I've used the larger or second largest one. It just really depends if you want to see a bit of that cardstock that's around it, or if you want to completely cover the whole. But it just adds some fun sparkle and just a little bit of extra color. For my last card, I have this background here that I created with that Lisa Horton Crafts color of the month. I have another video that is already shown when you're seeing this video where I created this background, and I used the color combination of the month with a couple other die sets. So I created 2 backgrounds in that video, not sure whether or which background I wanted to use for what I was creating in that one. And I wanted to share this background with the Snowflake Kisses collection, but I knew I wanted that video to go live before this collection was live. So I wanted to include this at the end of it. I have a bunch of the snowflakes die cut out of just some Hammermill cardstock, and I'm using that color combo of the month for ink blending and coloring those die cuts. So the color combo of the month is the natural pearl pad, the metallic platinum pad, all of these are metallic pads, and the frozen icicles pad. So it's a perfect palette for winter cards, and I love the shimmer you get from those metallic inks, and they ink blend beautifully with each other. So for my large detailed snowflakes, I use the natural pearl around the outside edges. Then I'm using the frozen icicles on the inside, and it's going to blend with that natural pearl that's on there. I wanted to do the lighter color first before the darker color because I didn't want to do the darker color and have my brush for the pearl pad, because it's basically a white pad. I didn't want that to start picking up the blue ink on that brush. So by doing the light color first, I don't have to worry about that darker brush picking up any of that light ink. It's not going to harm it in any way. For my solid pieces for these snowflakes, I'm using that platinum pad on that. And this is the one that is silver, but it's got a bit of a green tone to it. So it's almost green tan. Like, it's a really pretty color, and it's a really unique color. But because these are all metallic finishes, it looks perfect for winter cards. And I thought thought this would be perfect for this collection. So once I have all of these pieces ink blended, and I chose one of my sentiments that was heat embossed with silver and had the white background, and I used that frozen icicles ink pad on there to color that background for that sentiment. I'm going to glue these snowflakes together and layer them on top of each other, just the way that I've done for the last several in this video. I'm going to do this with these on this mat, that way I don't get ink on my fingers. You don't have to do it on the mat. You can easily take all these pieces off and do them separately. Sometimes I put things together while they're still on the mat right after I've done that ink blending, and sometimes I take them off. It just really depends on the mood that I'm in. At this point, I just wanted to start assembling them while they were on the top of my mat and just leave them there. So I put the large snowflakes together first, and then I put the center pieces to those snowflakes. And those pieces there, they're centers for these snowflakes, but you could easily use them as flowers. I think they'd make perfect flowers for in the spring. Once I have those glued together, I let them dry for just a few minutes. I put my acrylic block on top of them. You can see that it doesn't really cover the whole thing, but I wanted to let that glue set for just a little bit before I put the centers on the snowflakes. And once I have the centers on those snowflakes, I'm also going to add that acrylic block on there just to hold it flat for just a little bit while that glue sets on there. Then we can start taking all of these pieces off of the pad and start assembling our card. So I have an A2 card base here, and I'm using a mat that is trimmed down to 4 inches by 5¼ inches. I use that platinum pad just to rub around the outside edges of that and set that aside to dry. Then my inky background was trimmed to 3¾ inches by 5 inches. We can set those down and we can glue our snowflakes on. Now I want these 2 snowflakes to fit onto this front, so I'm going to have them going off the side, but those pieces that I trim off at the side, I'm going to keep them, and we're going to add them to the top right corner and the bottom left corner. So it looks like we have more snowflakes than there are, but they're off the card, if you will. So I am doing this when the card is completely assembled. If you prefer, you could also just do this on that inky background, then trim those pieces off and then assemble your card. By doing it this way, the snowflakes go all the way out to the card, so they go past the space of the inside piece. It was just a look that I wanted to do for this particular card, but if you don't like that look, if you want it to stay within our inky background, you can do this first and then you can assemble your card. Now I have a piece of Hammermill Cardstock that I trimmed my snowflakes out of, or die cut my snowflakes out of. I'm using that as a template to know exactly where to put each one of those pieces so that they make sense. Now I wanted to put some of the long pieces from our snowflake as well as the smaller pieces, but I wanted them to be spaced properly so that it looked proper. So by using the piece that we die cut one of those snowflakes out of, it makes it really easy to know exactly where those pieces are going to be glued. So all I have to do is add the glue between them, put our pieces down, and then we can lift that up. And when I lift it up, because I haven't waited for my glue to set, I do make sure to push those pieces down or hold those pieces down while I'm lifting up that template. The last step here is to add that sentiment to the center of the card, and then I added some of this opal gems to the center of the snowflakes. And obviously we're only going to be putting this on the 2 largest snowflakes. The smaller pieces don't have centers to them. Once those smaller pieces are dried, we can use our shears to just trim those pieces off so that they are all within the confines of our A2 card base. And all of those extra little bits can be trimmed off. So this is just to show you a different card with that color combo of the month, as well as for this video, because I had some solid cardstocks, to show some of those solid cardstocks with those ink pads, those metallic ink pads, as well as using this collection with that inky background that I had made from the previous video. And I love the final look of it. It looks so wintry to me. Next, we have our snowflake background with the Oceanside cardstock behind it, those glittery snowflakes with the gem centers. Then we have our snowflake background that was die cut out of the pearl cardstock with our large snowflake in the center of it. Then we have our snowflake wreath, and again I put the gem in the center of the wreath, but you could also add more around the outer layer of snowflakes and put them in the center of those as well. Our first large snowflake with the background that was embossed into the cardstock for the background of our card, and then the super simple card with the gift boxes, the very first one that we did. You could even, if you wanted, use that snowflake background to emboss the background to add a little bit of extra texture to that if you wanted. You'll find everything that I've used listed and linked down in the description box below. Thank you so much for taking your time and spending it with me. I really appreciate you being here. I hope you have a fantastic day.